Hello there, and welcome to Tailgates and Drive Shafts, the podcast that is designed to help people with researching and looking for their next truck and their next mods. I am your host, Ian Tilley. In this episode, we will be covering basically Trucks 101. I had meant to do this episode before the Tundra overview, but this is what happened, and we're going to roll with it. Adapt and overcome, right? Trucks 101. We're going to cover the most basic, fundamental things about trucks. Since this podcast is meant to help people with researching and looking for their next truck or perhaps their first truck, I think it's important to help those who are on their initial discovery, their first truck ever, to learn some of these jargon, some of these colloquialisms, some of these things that are different than cars that they might not know what it means. Is it important to their search or is it not? Is it just some detail that they see in these ads for trucks and posts on AutoTrader, or perhaps in their research as they're looking on the internet forums and Facebook groups? To begin with a definition of what is a truck. When I put this into Google, it says, or rather the first entry says, it is a light motor vehicle with an open top rear cargo area. Which to me, that's mostly accurate, leaves a few key points out in my opinion. I would modify that to also include this is a body on frame designed vehicle with rear wheel drive or four wheel drive and a longitudinal engine, which is what's required to do rear wheel drive on these things. One thing to keep in mind with rear-wheel drive vehicles is that when it comes to driving in the snow and the ice, they really do not do that well. It is a time that a front-wheel drive vehicle is superior. Because of the front-wheel drive vehicle, you have all that extra weight of the engine sitting on top of the wheels that are being driven that provide power to the ground. With a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you lose that weight that helps give you traction. This is the reason why a lot of the times you'll see people throwing sandbags or other heavier weighted objects into the bed of their trucks in winter to try and give them more traction in the snow and the ice. The longitudinal engine basically means that the engine sits in the vehicle with the very back end pointing to the back, which is what enables rear wheel drive. On most of your modern sedans, crossovers, vans, what have you, most engines are what's called transverse, where they sit on top of the axle and they are facing the same way as the axle, or as the definition says, it is perpendicular to the direction of travel. The reason why that these engines sit that way is because of how the transmission works. Basically, it's almost like a transfer case that it drops down from the engine to the axle right below it and turns it that way. The modern sedan, SUVs, vans are what's called Unibody. A Unibody design basically is you have one piece of metal and that's what gets turned into your entire frame. When a body on frame vehicle is built, they have to bolt down the cab, bolt down the bed, bolt down all the other body panels and the hood, the trunk, tailgate, doors, what have you, onto pieces on top of the frame. The unibody, the whole frame, the whole body is one piece. They just have to add on like the doors, hoods, trunk, liftgate, whatever, and that's it. Everything else is already part of that frame that was initially made and designed. That's why I say that the likes of the Honda Ridgeline, the Ford Maverick, and the Hyundai Santa Cruz aren't really trucks. Because most of those are front-wheel drive, they're unibody, they're tiny, they're not really true trucks. Now, if you go with just the Google definition of it, has an open top rear cargo area and a light motor vehicle, then yeah, those fit the description. I don't think they do. Also, what light motor vehicle means is essentially passenger vehicles. A heavy motor vehicle would be things like your 18-wheelers. First thing we'll cover is or rather the next thing we'll cover, what is the cab? What are the options for cabs? Basically, a cab is where you and your passengers sit. It's that interior space. It is that bubble which protects you from the elements and hopefully from any sort of rollover crash. You have pretty much three different common options of cabs. You have the standard cab, which has 2 doors. For most of trucks, ever since the earliest days of trucks in the Ford Model T era, all the way till about the 90s, late 90s, most of your trucks were standard cab with a 3-person bench seat. Then we have the extended cab, which is usually a 2-door cab again, but it has like a half back seat. Very cramped most of the time, but it is helpful for having like small kids or being able to throw stuff in the back, things that you don't want to have exposed to the elements of the sun, or worry about flying out of your vehicle as you're driving down the road, or rather flying out of your bed. For the most part, up until again about the 90s, with these extended cabs, you didn't have doors for easy access into the back of the cab. You just had the 2 main doors, and then you have to fold the seat and push it forward in order for people to climb in and out of that back seat. Then around the early 90s, they started offering a 3rd door. It was a half door on the passenger side that would enable people to get in and out easier. And then it was like the early thousands when they started offering it to have 4 doors, 2 of your full doors in the front, and then the 2 half doors in the back. Again, easy access. Typically, this meant you have to open up the front door, and then there would be a latch to open up the rear door. You could not open up the rear door without opening the front door first. Right around 2007, at least starting with the Tundras, and I think Chevy and maybe even Ford, is they started offering the extended cab with its own separate door, meaning that you could open up the rear door on the extended cab separately from the front door. Then you have your crew cab, which is 4 full doors. You have a full back seat. These have really grown in the past several years. These were first introduced, I think, like in the 60s or 70s, but only on the bigger trucks. Since those bigger trucks were used for work, half the time they saw work crews like for landscaping or other jobs. They want to be able to fit all of a work crew inside this one vehicle, save time, save vehicles, efficiency, and all that stuff. Right around the early thousands, Ford made its own leap and added a crew cab to the half-ton truck. It was called a Super Crew, and still is. Ever since then, it has become quite popular to add crew cabs to half-ton trucks. At least here in Texas, where pretty much every guy and half the women have trucks, which means that it is not only a work vehicle, but it's also meant to be a daily driver. It is meant to help ferry the family. The most common configuration of truck you'll see outside of a branded work truck is going to be a half-ton crew cab truck. Now keep in mind that pretty much every manufacturer has different names for the same thing. When it comes to a standard cab, I think pretty much I'll just call it a cab, standard cab. Crew cabs, you've got the Super Cab with Ford, Access Cab with the older first-gen Toyota Tundra and the Toyota Tacomas, Double Cab on the newer 2007 and newer Toyota Tundras. I forget what they call it with GM and Dodge. I think they just call them extended cabs. Then the crew cabs, Ford has the Super Crew, Toyota has the Crew Max, Dodge has just the regular crew cab, and then the Mega Cab. One thing to note with these crew cabs is also the difference in sizes over the years. Up until about 2007, most of these crew cabs weren't that big to begin with. I have a friend, I'm sitting like a 2008 GMC Sierra crew cab, and I was still squished. Now, I'm a 6'2" guy with long legs. My knees were crushing into his back, or rather into the back of his driver's seat. The crazy thing is in my 2017 extended cab Tundra, again, 6'2" guy in my back seat, and my knees aren't squishing into the back of the driver's seat. With the 2007 Tundra, the Crew Max was the biggest cab by far. It is still a giant cab. It wasn't until about 2014 when the F-150 and the GM trucks caught up with having such big crew cabs. Of course, Dodge has their mega cab, so they didn't really bother with making their regular crew cab any bigger. Ford, I've got to say, is pretty good at the marketing with these, naming every single cab. Not only the cabs, but they've got a name for everything. And it just helps reinforce the brand loyalty, the marketing, everything by having their own unique names for everything. Now, the tricky thing is when you get into the next bit about the beds. You have basically three common sizes of beds, at least for the past about 10-20 years. There's a short bed, which is about 5.5 feet, a standard bed, which is roughly 6.5 feet, and a long bed, which is about 8 feet. And of course, the exact length kind of changes from manufacturer to manufacturer along with the generation of truck, but these days those are about the kind of rule of thumb lengths. The popular thing used to be is getting a standard bed short cab truck. That was kind of a fast truck, kind of an easy truck to have, and there's still kind of a cult following for it today. But there aren't that many sold these days just because everyone is starting to use their trucks for daily personal use. So they don't have a need, or rather they have more needs than a standard cab can supply. So most trucks are going to be at least extended cab, if not crew cab. When you get a crew cab truck, most of the time a short bed is standard, because when they're manufacturing these trucks, they try to reuse as much as they can, right? On the frame, those rails I was talking about earlier, they have this one length, and that one length can handle either an extended cab standard size bed or a crew cab short bed, but it can't accommodate a crew cab standard or crew cab long bed. In order to offer a crew cab standard or long bed, then they have to add on different sizes of frames, which increases cost, etc., etc. It's just a way to keep extended cab standard bed, crew cab short bed. It just makes things easier on the manufacturer. Even then, here in Texas, since again everyone uses their trucks to ferry the family, the crew cab short bed combination is probably the most common truck you'll see on the road. But having a 5.5 bed can be kind of limiting. There's a lot of things that I've hauled my bed that were 6 feet. And granted, you can put the tailgate down, you can use tow straps or bungee cords, ratchet straps, whatever, to keep things in the bed, or use a bed extender. But still, there are so many times when it's just been nice to have a 6.5 foot bed and be able to just put everything in there and not worry about anything going over or having to tow, or rather having to strap something down on top of it. Then you have different bed types. You have the standard, what's called the fleet side bed, which is basically your standard bed these days. It is just a straight bed. There's nothing added onto it. There's nothing sticking out or sticking in. It's just a straight edged, or almost a straight edged from the cab to the rear bumper. Back in the, 80s, 90s, and some of the thousands, you have what's called a flare side bed. It was a bed that the actual cargo space was narrower, but you also had steps built into the side of them, which, again, they have their own cult following. But a lot of time these days, everyone wants to make the full use of their bed, which means that smaller, narrower flare side bed is more of an appearance thing than a practical thing, therefore not really used that much. Some people argued that the step sides were ugly beds, since they normally look different than the regular fleet side bed. They just didn't look right. especially the Toyota Tundra step side. Very controversial. Some people think they look great, some people think they look ugly, some think they look just weird. These days, no one has to worry about that because I don't even remember the last time a step side was offered. I mean, maybe early thousands, probably the last time we saw those. Then you have the Dualies, which this kind of crosses over into more drivetrain. What a dually is, instead of having just 2 wheels in the back, you have 4 wheels in the back. Since you have that extra wheel on each side, the bed has these quote-unquote hips to provide coverage over those tires. That way the tires stay protected from anything above, and also helps from kicking out anything that might get launched into the air and end up damaging someone's windshield or the paint on their hood, etc., etc. Also, the other thing about trucks is that they're easy to upfit. What upfitting is when you have a truck that is built and then the manufacturer leaves it either with no bed or puts a bed on there, but the end user will take off that bed and put something else on there. They'll have a service bed that has all sorts of doors and cabinets and drawers, all sorts of stuff that's meant to help with organizing tools and gear and equipment. They might install a flatbed, or it might be a specialized crane bed or some other type of specialized bed. That's what upfitting is trying to up the fitment, I guess, if you will, to help work with whatever they're doing, whatever job they're doing, whatever thing they use their truck for. I mean, this isn't really a thing for those who just use their truck to throw groceries in, go from point A to point B, all sorts of that stuff. This is meant more for those who operate fleets or for those who use their truck for working whatever business they're in. Moving on to the next section is suspension. This is where things can get pretty convoluted pretty quickly. You have the basics. You've got lifting a truck. This can be anything from adding on some of these puck spacers, which I highly recommend against, changing your shocks, adding on lift kits, going from anywhere from a 3-inch lift to 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12. I know a guy who once did a 16-inch lift on his Tundra. As crazy as that was, it was helpful at the time that I think Houston got flooded. He was one of the few guys who was able to actually drive his truck into the flooded waters and be able to help out with the search and rescue operations. Other than that limited application, you don't really see that much need or any people with anything bigger than like a 4 or 6 inch lift. Oh, and then you've got like all the big SEMA show trucks. Those guys will have 10, 12, 13, 14 inch lifts just because it's all part of the show truck persona. Then you have those that get lowered, which you don't really see that much these days. It is much more common in the street scene for trucks. They, instead of lifting it higher to add bigger tires, what have you, trucks get lowered. It's more of a street thing, something that looks cooler. I'm not a fan of lowering trucks. I've only seen a handful of trucks that to me looked good lowered. Most of the time, it not my cup of tea. Kudos to those that have it and like it. Great for you guys. Happy for you guys. Hope you like it. But it's not for me. Then you got bagged, which what bagged means is essentially you have airbags as part of your suspension to help with lifting or lowering your truck. Practically speaking, this is meant to help with towing. It can help keep your truck from sagging too much by upping the air pressure. And then when you are unloaded, you can change it so that your truck has a normal appearance and a normal ride. Some use airbags as a way to help with the lowering or the lifting. That way they can lower the truck all the way to the ground when it is off and just staying put and parked. Then they can air up the airbags so that the truck gets lifted up a little bit and they can manage to drive without scraping the bottom of the truck all over the place. Then there is having a truck leveled. which is what I've done with my Toyota Tundra. Instead of worrying about trying to lift it or lower it, you just get it leveled. It provides a little bit of lift in the front, a little bit of lift in the back, and that's it. Because trucks tend to have what's called a rake. If you look at most trucks from the factory, they have a tendency to have the nose or the front end a little bit lower than the rear end. This is meant to help with when you're towing. That way, whenever you start towing, instead of having your truck pointing up at the sky, it goes from being pointed a little bit down to being pointed right at level. This is done not only for looks, but for safety. If you have your truck leveled, and then you put a trailer on it, now your headlights are pointing towards the sky, well, they're pointing towards the sky. They're not pointing towards the ground. They are now useless in trying to drive at night when towing. When you add that rake, it kind of helps offset. That way when you have a trailer on the back of your truck and you don't have your headlights going, instead of down, they're now going out normally. There are options these days, especially like with the Tundra, you have an end cap switch that lets you change the angle of your headlights. That way, if you go from unloaded to towing and now your headlights are pointing at the sky, you can actually aim them down to help with that. And then once you become unloaded, you hit the switch and then it goes back to going straight. And I think these days there are some trucks that will do this automatically. Some others you still have to use some sort of switch or dial to do it. And others are so old that you actually have to go in with like a wrench and manually adjust the housing to be at the angle you need. Then there are like your common mods. Now this is the one phrase that throws off so many people, which is a tonneau cover. And that's spelled Tonneau and then cover. Basically, it's a fancy word of, or a fancy way of saying a bed cover. Now I plan to do a whole episode in the future just on tonneau covers, because there are so many styles, so many different brands, so many different features. It can be a headache trying to figure out what is best for you, what is best for your needs, what brand is best, what design is best. It's a whole minefield to go through, and a deep rabbit hole whenever you're researching. Trust me, I've been there. But a tonneau cover is basically a bed cover. That's all it means. Some of your most common ones are going to be your soft covers that are either roll-ups or trifold. You have your big, heavy fiberglass covers that are usually painted to match the color of the truck body. Those are quite difficult to get into. They're also quite heavy. And then you have some of your more modular ones like the Paragon. You've got the retracts. That way you can have the cover retract into itself, even though it is a hard material. You have, what else is there? My mind went blank. There's a few other different styles of bed covers. There's so many to choose from. I know what I like. It's not necessarily what other people like. And again, this is one of those things that there's no one just like superior bed cover. Now, within certain types, okay, sure, you have this brand is better than that brand. But when it comes to what type is best, it just all depends on what you need a cover for, what you use your truck for, so on and so forth. Then you have the exhaust mods. You have a straight pipe, which means that you delete the muffler, so it's just going straight from the catalytic converter to the muffler tip, or rather to the exhaust tip. There's no hiding, no trying to quiet down the sound outside of the cats. That's what I've got on my truck. I love it. It's at that limit of how loud I like it. If it was any louder, I would not like it. I also have what's called a Hermholtz Resonator, which is basically a muffler kind of thing. When you hear someone say cat back exhaust, that means that anything from the catalytic converter's back is a whole system. Because the way that exhaust flows is that after you have combustion in the engine, it goes into the exhaust manifold. And then if you have turbo, it goes into the turbo to spin the turbo. And then either way, whether you have turbos or just naturally aspirated, goes from those two pieces to tubes that go to the catalytic converters where it helps burn out some of the unburned soot and tries to basically make the exhaust cleaner for the environment. And then after the catalytic converter, it goes to the muffler and then out the tip to the air. There are so many different options. You've got Flowmaster, you've got Corsa, Borla. I mean, there's so many options. I recommend once you are looking at doing exhaust, if that's something you want to do to your truck, just look up YouTube videos, type in your year, your make, model, what engine you have, exhaust. And there are so many sound clips of the different engines out there, the different mufflers out there with the different engine options, configurations, and you can have an idea of what it'll sound like. Then there's also lighting. You've got people who want to switch from halogen to LED, HID. You have people that do things like the Raptor lights on the grill, or rock lights, backup pods, inside LEDs, ambient lighting. There's so many things you can do these days with lighting on a truck. When it comes to the headlights, be careful. If you're switching to an LED, be very, very careful. On headlights, there's a thing called the cutoff. This is what is designed into the housings to make sure that you are not blinding everyone in your path. To have proper factory cutoff will help with not blinding people. The first set of LED bulbs I ever had no cutoff. I'd be going down the road and I would be lighting up signs half a mile down. I'd be lighting up signs on a intersecting interstate. It was crazy how much light was being thrown around. Then I switched to Xenon Depot LED bulbs that had a cutoff built in, and I stopped blinding everyone. So be careful. Make sure that if you do switch to LED bulbs from a halogen, either make sure the bulbs have a cutoff built in so you're not blinding everyone, or get them retrofitted. That way they are meant and optimized for LED or HID instead of just blinding everyone. Then you also have, again, the things like the perimeter lighting, courtesy lighting, rock lights. I've got my rock lights tied into the unlock button. That way whenever I unlock the truck, I can see around the truck and can try to avoid ant hills or puddles or what other obstacles at night where I'm in a place with very little light. And then you also have light bars. You got, of course, the good old country boys who put on a giant light bar to the cab, but these days there's lots of quote-unquote stealth kits, ones that you can put inside your hood bulge on the Tundras, you can put inside your grill, put inside your lower bumper, so on and so forth. Another popular mod is the cold air intake, which basically means it's trying to take cold air, which cold air is better because it's more compressed. When it's more compressed, you get better combustion, more power, more efficiency, etc., etc. But a lot of your cold air intakes are almost useless. They don't really do much for a normal stock engine except for making it sound better. It won't actually do much to affect your performance until you start changing other things like your exhaust manifold and your headers, and you start adding things to it to make it worth adding a cold air intake. Then probably the most common thing to do on a truck is change up your wheels and your tires. When it comes to wheels, you have different offsets, so you got them either sticking out or flush with the side of the body. You've got different types, different colors. I mean, every day in all sorts of these online groups, people are asking all day, every day about the different wheels that are out there, different tires, what is recommended, blah, 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 blah. I'll say with tires, you gotta be careful to make sure you're getting a good brand of tire. Things like Falcon, Nitto, Wild Peak, BFG KO2s are very common all-terrain truck tire. They're good when the road is dry. As soon as it gets wet, they are horrible. I had one set that came with my truck from the factory, or rather from the dealership, and I mean, they were a good tire. They lasted me about 60,000 miles. But again, every time it got wet, they were just horrible. Then the last two parts I want to save are the two parts that make up the title of this podcast. What is a tailgate? What is a drive shaft? Tailgates are pretty common. Is that basically the door for the bed. It's got a handle, you lift it down, you gain access to the bed. It keeps things from rolling out the back of the bed. These days, tailgates are getting super fancy. You've got Dodge with their split tailgate where you can either fold it down, or it's got like the 60-30 or 60-40 split that you can open those doors up to the sides. With GM, you have their multi-pro tailgate. You can lower it and then add a different, or have it lowered. Then the next piece drops down. It provides a step, or it can just be giving you extra space to get into the bed. And then you got Ford with their, in my opinion, the coolest tailgate that has the built-in step inside and the handle to grab onto. For someone like me that has knee problems, that is great for helping get inside the bed. Maybe for those who are older, or others that have knee issues, leg issues, mobility issues, that can come in handy, I'm sure. And then what is a drive shaft? Going back to the beginning of this podcast, talking about the different things out there, rear-wheel drive, this is how you transmit power from the engine to the transmission to the back wheels, because you've got the engine and the transmission in the front and the axle in the back. How do you connect the two? A drive shaft is essentially a giant metal cylindrical tube. Well, that's redundant. Basically, a giant tube that has what's called U-joints on either end. A U-joint is a way for the drive shaft to be locked into place on either end to the transmission and to the axle, but allow for flexing. As you're driving and the rear axle actuates or fluctuates and goes up, goes down with bumps, you are changing the angle and the pitch of the drive shaft, and this is how it can adapt to whatever elevation or whatever bumps you're going through without breaking anything. That being said, people still manage to break drive shafts. So that's what it is. It's basically, it is how, on a rear-wheel drive vehicle, how the engine transmits power from the transmission to the rear axle. It's just a giant metal tube. These are usually not hollow. These are solid shafts for that durability, which means these are very heavy duty, hard to break. But if you are doing like rock crawling or you get stuck, you can twist them. I have seen twisted crankshafts, and it takes a lot of force to twist off a crankshaft and break it. This has been Trucks 101. I hope this has been helpful to some degree. If you have any questions about something you were hoping to hear about, some term, some part, and I did not answer it, please feel free to email me, contact me through Facebook or through the podcast. Or if you have a set of questions you want to have answered on the next Trucks 101 or FAQ type podcast, let me know. I want to be able to help you out. I want to be able to answer questions that maybe not only you have, but there might be others who have the same questions you do. Or if there's anything that I've mentioned in the podcast that you want me to expound upon, again, please feel free to hit me up. I would love to be able to help you and answer any questions that you have. As always, feel free to check out the website. I will also include links for the Facebook page and the Facebook group for discussion. With that being said, everyone have a good day.